I used to think nothing could scare me, after a decade working nights on an oil platform. But that was before the ocean started watching us back. It began with a shimmer beneath the floodlights, a shape that didn't belong in the waves, and the sound of something breathing just below the surface. Out here, surrounded by endless black water and steel, we lived by 11 strict rules to stay alive. Rules written after people stopped coming back from their shifts. I remember the first time I broke one of them. I just wanted to see what was floating near the waterline. But now I understand why we never looked twice. The first time I heard Rule 1, never check the waterline after midnight, I laughed it off. It sounded like one of those superstitions passed around by exhausted rig workers, like not whistling during storms or never leaving your boots facing the ocean. But the way old man Griggs told it, leaning against the rail with that dead cigarette in his mouth, made it sound less like advice and more like a warning carved into bone. If you see the reflection moving when the water's still, he said, it's already too late. Back then I thought he was just trying to haze the new guy. Life on the rig doesn't leave much room for imagination. You wake up to metal groaning under pressure, the smell of oil in your hair, and that constant low hum from the machinery beneath your feet. The sea below never stops moving, but at night, it turns into a mirror, dark, smooth, and silent. I worked the night shift mostly alone, checking gauges, reading pressure valves, and logging data in the control shack. The other men stayed inside after midnight, no matter what. I didn't think much of it until the first night I had to walk the perimeter by myself. That night, the air was heavy and windless, and the floodlights stretched long shadows across the deck. I leaned over the railing to check the lower pipes and caught my own reflection in the black water. For a second, it looked wrong, like my head turned a split second after I did. I blinked hard, laughed it off, and told myself it was just fatigue. But then I noticed something else, a ripple spreading outward, though nothing had fallen in. I stepped back, heart thudding, and that was when I remembered Griggs's words. He'd said if you looked too long, the water would start to look back. The following morning, Griggs asked if I'd done my rounds. When I said yes, his face went pale. He didn't even ask what I saw, just muttered something about the first one always being curious. Later that day, the lights on the southern platform went out for 2 hours. Maintenance blamed a faulty junction box, but no one volunteered to check it. I offered, thinking it'd prove I wasn't spooked, but the foreman shut me down with a glare. Not after midnight, he said flatly, then turned away. I realized everyone knew that line, they just didn't talk about why. Over the next few nights, I started noticing things that didn't fit the rhythm of the rig. Tools left on the deck would be soaked by morning, even when it hadn't rained. The cameras near the edge picked up static around 12:03 a.m. every night. Once I swore I saw a wet handprint on the glass door of the mess hall, 5 long fingers too thin to be human. No one else saw it, or maybe they pretended not to. That's when I started wondering what exactly was moving in the water after midnight, and why everyone acted like they already knew. By the end of that week, curiosity had gnawed through whatever caution I had left. The night was clear, the waves flat as slate, and the platform lights cast pale circles over the ocean. I waited until my shift partner dozed off, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped outside. The metal beneath my boots was slick, colder than usual. As I leaned over the edge again, I aimed the light downward. The beam barely touched the surface before something underneath moved. It was slow, deliberate, not like a fish or a current. My reflection seemed to ripple and stretch, and for a heartbeat, I saw another face forming beneath mine. The light flickered, and my reflection smiled before I did. It wasn't my face anymore. The mouth was too wide, the teeth too small and even, like they were borrowed. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight, and it rolled to a stop against the railing. When I picked it up again, the water was calm, perfectly still, and I could only see my own terrified eyes staring back. I didn't finish the round that night. I stayed inside, pretending to check the pressure gauges until dawn, trying to convince myself that exhaustion and darkness had played tricks on me. Griggs found me the next morning, half asleep in the control shack. He looked at me for a long time, then said quietly, "You looked, didn't you?" I didn't answer, but that must have been enough. He sighed and said, "You'll start hearing it soon. Don't follow it." I tried to ask what he meant, but he was already walking away, shaking his head. That night, I left my cabin light on and kept the curtains drawn tight. Still, sometime after midnight, I heard it, a faint voice outside, calling my name, so soft it almost sounded like it came from underwater. The next few nights blurred together in a fog of fear and fatigue. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of the waterline, black, still and waiting. Sometimes I'd see that same face below the surface, grinning up at me, its eyes wide and patient. Once I woke up drenched in seawater, though the room was sealed shut. I told myself it was sweat, but the air smelled like salt. No one believed me when I mentioned it. They just told me to drink less coffee and get some rest. But the voice outside kept getting clearer, closer. On the 7th night, the voice wasn't outside anymore. It was right behind the door of my cabin, whispering my name like it already knew I'd answer. I pressed my hands over my ears, shaking, but I could still hear it, soft and wet and familiar. When it stopped, I thought I'd imagined the whole thing, until I noticed the puddle seeping under the door. The water was black, too thick to be seawater. I grabbed the nearest tool and opened the door just enough to look out. The hallway was dry, empty and silent, but the puddle was gone. By now, I barely slept. I kept the lights on, the radio playing static, anything to drown out the quiet. Griggs stopped coming to work after that week. They said he'd been transferred, but his bunk was still full of his things, and no one would touch them. One night, I found a note wedged inside his locker. It was written in shaky handwriting, "Don't check the waterline. If you already did, don't look again." There were scratches on the metal near the lock, long curved marks, like fingernails dragged through paint. 2 nights later, I heard the splash. It wasn't loud, but in the dead silence of the rig, it might as well have been a gunshot. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to stay put, but something in that sound, the weight of it, the familiarity, made me move. I stepped outside and saw the light swinging over the deck. There was a figure by the railing, shoulders slumped, dripping wet. I called out, thinking it was one of the crew, but the figure didn't turn. When I got closer, I saw the water pooling at its feet, seeping into the cracks between the metal plates. I stopped a few feet away. The thing's clothes were mine, same jacket, same boots, but its head was tilted just enough that I couldn't see the face. The wind picked up, and the figure began to lean toward the edge, like it was being pulled. For a moment I thought it was about to jump, and then it turned. My knees almost gave out. It was my face, exactly, but pale and bloated, eyes empty and mouth stretched too wide. It raised its hand, my hand, and pointed at the water. I stumbled back, tripping over the flashlight again, and when I looked up, the deck was empty. The next morning, I asked to be transferred off the rig. The foreman said no. Contracts, rotations, safety regulations, the usual nonsense. But when I looked at his face, I saw fear there, real fear. He knew what I'd seen. Before I left his office, he said, "Stay inside, after midnight, no matter what you hear." I never asked him why. I didn't need to. That night, I sealed my cabin door, sat by the radio, and tried to ignore the slow, wet footsteps that circled outside my room until sunrise. By the end of my shift week, I was a ghost among the living. The others avoided me, like my fear might spread through touch. On my last night before rotation, I found another note tucked under my door. Same handwriting as before. "If you look again, it takes your place." I didn't sleep that night, not even when the whispering started again. It said my name over and over, patient and rhythmic, like it was trying to remind me who I was. I think it wanted me to forget which reflection was real. When the chopper came the next morning, I didn't look down once. The ocean below was calm, deceptively calm, and for a moment I thought I saw a shape floating just beneath the surface, a dark outline with its face turned upward. I forced my eyes shut until we were clear of the rig. I've never been back since. But sometimes, when I look into a mirror too long, I swear I see it again, a faint shimmer in my reflection, a grin that comes a heartbeat too late. When I first heard Rule 2, never respond to the voice that calls your name from outside, it sounded like something written for children, not grown men working 100 miles off the coast. But after what happened with the reflection, I stopped questioning the logic behind our safety list. The nights grew longer, heavier somehow, as if the ocean itself was pressing against the platform. Everyone kept their radios close, not for orders but for company, because silence out here has a way of whispering back. I learned quickly that voices don't always come from where you think. It started 3 nights after the doppelganger incident. I hadn't slept properly. Every time I drifted off, I felt a weight on my chest, like seawater trying to hold me down. Around 1 a.m., the comms channel crackled to life. Static at first, then a soft voice, my name drawn out like a sigh. I thought it was the new guy, Porter, playing around on the emergency line. But when I checked the roster, Porter was on the opposite side of the rig, fast asleep. The voice called again, closer this time, not through the radio but from outside my cabin door. The sound was gentle, patient, the way someone speaks when they already know you'll answer. I sat frozen on my bunk, staring at the handle as it trembled ever so slightly. The door was sealed, the hallway lights off, yet I could see faint movement through the bottom gap. A shadow, tall and still, blocking the light that shouldn't have been there. It whispered my name again, perfectly mimicking my own tone, as if I'd spoken to myself. I held my breath until the whisper stopped. Then, without warning, 3 dull thuds echoed through the corridor, steady as a heartbeat. In the morning, I asked around, pretending I'd only heard strange interference. No one laughed. Instead, a mechanic named Ruiz pulled me aside and said quietly, "You heard it, didn't you?" I nodded, and he rubbed his temple. "They always call by name first. That's how they pick." He wouldn't say who they were, only that once you answer, you start forgetting things. Names, memories, what you look like in the mirror. That night, Ruiz left a small metal charm outside my door, a rusted nut tied with red wire. "For noise," he said. "They hate noise." The following night, the charm worked for a while. The rig moaned and creaked as usual, and the charm rattled faintly in the wind. But sometime after midnight, it stopped, dead silence. I stared at the ceiling, counting breaths, until I heard the whisper again, softer this time, coming from the porthole by my bed. The glass was fogged, but a shadow lingered beyond it, faintly human. "Open up," it said in my exact voice. "It's cold out here." My pulse pounded so hard, I thought my chest might split. I pulled the blanket over my head like a terrified child, and didn't move until dawn. When sunlight finally spilled through the blinds, I dared to look at the porthole. A single wet handprint smeared the glass from the outside. I told the foreman what I'd seen, expecting mockery, but he only nodded grimly and added another line to the safety sheet taped near the radio. He didn't even need to explain what it meant. Later, I noticed his hands were shaking when he wrote it. The paper read simply, "Never respond to the voice that calls your name from outside." Someone had underlined "respond" 3 times. By the end of the week, the whispers spread. Porter heard his wife's voice one night, the same wife who died in a fire 2 years ago. He swore it was her, until we found him standing by the outer railing, eyes blank, body swaying to some rhythm none of us could hear. It took 3 men to drag him back inside. He screamed the whole time that she was just below the platform, waiting for him. After that, we kept all exits, locked past midnight. Still, sometimes I'd wake to the faint click of a latch being tested from the other side. Ruiz vanished 2 nights later. The cameras showed him leaving his post around 2 a.m., walking calmly toward the southern deck where the floodlights don't reach. He never looked back. The last frame before static shows a shape meeting him by the railing, human at first glance, until its arms bent the wrong way. When they found his boots the next morning, they were neatly placed beside the guardrail, dry as bone. We never recovered his body. The ocean below was smooth and empty, like it had swallowed its secret whole. I started recording everything after that. Audio logs, notes, sketches of the rig's layout. I wanted proof that I wasn't unraveling. But the tapes began picking up things I didn't hear while recording. Faint breathing, distant humming, and occasionally my own voice whispering words I hadn't spoken. Once, when I played one back, it said, "Let me in," followed by a long wet gasp. I smashed that recorder and threw it overboard. But the next night, I woke to the sound of tape reels turning in my locker. I hadn't brought another recorder aboard. Every night, the voices grew bolder. Sometimes they came from the hallway, sometimes the vents, sometimes from inside the walls themselves. One night, I heard Griggs again. His voice was unmistakable, that gravelly drawl, the way he stretched his vowels. "You looked when you shouldn't have," he said, "but you can still make it right." I almost answered, my lips parted, but I caught myself at the last moment. I remembered the rule, and instead of speaking, I turned on every machine in the room. Fans, pumps, radios, anything that made noise. The voice stopped instantly. The next morning, I found a new wet handprint on the glass, smaller this time, like a child's. Beneath it, faint scratches formed letters. Talk. I didn't mention it to anyone. There were fewer of us left now, and the foreman refused to radio for evacuation. He said the sea was too unsettled. I think he knew the truth, that whatever was calling to us didn't want us to leave. That night, I barricaded the door with metal crates, stuffed earplugs in my ears, and stared at the porthole until exhaustion dragged me under. When I woke, the door was open. The crates hadn't been moved. They'd been bypassed, as if the metal had melted around invisible hands. My radio hissed softly. Through the static came a faint echo of my own voice, whispering from earlier logs, repeating my name over and over. It wasn't playback. I'd destroyed those tapes. I picked up the radio and whispered, "Who is this?" The moment I spoke, the whispering stopped, replaced by a low hum beneath the rig that vibrated through the floor. I realized too late I'd broken the rule. The lights flickered, and the air turned wet and heavy. Water began dripping from the ceiling, not from pipes, but from the steel itself, seeping like sweat. The hum deepened until it became a rhythm, a pulse that matched my heartbeat. I ran for the control room, but every corridor looked the same, twisting into unfamiliar paths. Doors led to places that shouldn't exist. Hallways submerged knee-deep in cold water, stairwells that descended into blackness, where light refused to travel. Behind me, footsteps splashed softly, following just out of sight. When I finally reached the main deck, the ocean was waiting. It stretched endless and glassy, reflecting the platform's trembling lights. In the center of that reflection stood figures, dozens of them, each a perfect mirror of someone who'd once worked here. I saw Griggs, Ruiz, Porter, even myself among them, all smiling that same too-wide grin. Their mouths moved in unison, and though no sound reached my ears, I knew exactly what they were saying. "Answer." I turned and ran, every muscle screaming, until I reached the radio tower. I stayed there until dawn, clinging to the steel bars, refusing to look down. When the sun finally rose, the reflection was gone. But the silence that followed felt alive, like something had merely gone deeper, waiting. I don't know what would have happened if I'd kept talking. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. But I know this much. The voice that calls your name out here isn't asking to be heard, it's asking to be remembered. The nights out here have their own kind of silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the one that makes you hear your own heartbeat in your ears. After what happened with the voices, I started paying closer attention to every sound on the rig, every creak of metal and sigh of wind. Still, that third week, curiosity got the better of me. The floodlights cast long ribbons of light over the waves, and something in the reflection shimmered, something that didn't belong. I should have remembered Rule 3, never look directly into the water after midnight. But I leaned forward anyway, elbows on the cold railing, just to see what was moving beneath. It was me, or at least, that's what it wanted me to think. My reflection stared back, perfect down to the smallest detail, except for one thing: it wasn't copying me anymore. When I blinked, it didn't. When I moved, it stayed still. And then, as the wind howled through the guardrails, its lips twitched into a slow, deliberate grin. My stomach tightened, and I stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the damp metal deck. The reflection didn't fade with the ripples. It just hung there, suspended, smiling. Then, in the faint glow of the floodlights, I saw dozens of faint outlines around it. Faces, all pale and motionless, hovering just below the surface. By the time I got inside, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely lock the door. Harris was already in the control room, scanning the monitors. "You okay?" he asked without looking up. I nodded too fast. "Just the wind," I said. He turned to me slowly, his face unreadable. "Don't look at the water," he said quietly. "Especially not after midnight. The surface isn't what it seems anymore." He didn't elaborate, just went back to his screen, but his hands were trembling too. That's when I noticed one of the cameras facing the east side of the platform. Its feed showed only static, except for one frame that seemed to pulse, like something was moving close beneath the lens. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that reflection, the grin stretching wider, teeth too sharp, eyes too still. Around 2 a.m., I heard a low hum, almost like singing, carried through the pipes. It wasn't mechanical, it was too human. I went to the comms room, but the sound wasn't coming from the speakers. It was vibrating through the walls, as if the rig itself was humming with it. I put my hand on the metal, and it was ice cold. The melody stopped the second I did. I backed away slowly, not daring to look out the small window that faced the deck. I knew what I'd see if I did. When dawn came, the platform was quiet again, but the sea below looked different, greener, thicker, like something was moving just under the surface film. I told Harris about the humming, but he just stared at me with this hollow look. "You heard them," he said. "That's how it starts. They try to get your attention first, through sound, then sight." I wanted to laugh it off, but there was no humor in his eyes. "Whatever you do," he said, "don't make eye contact. They'll use your reflection to pull you in." That last line stuck with me all day. Pull you in, like my reflection wasn't just an image. It was a doorway. By the next night, I was jumpy at every flicker of light. The floodlights buzzed faintly, their glow pulsing like a heartbeat. I tried to distract myself by checking pressure gauges, recalibrating sensors, anything to stay busy. But sometime after midnight, the lights dimmed. Just for a second, that was enough. In the glass panel of the control room door, I saw movement, a faint silhouette, perfectly still, like someone standing just outside, my own shape, only darker. It was smiling again. I turned off the interior lights, hoping it would vanish, but the faint outline remained, even in the dark. That was when the intercom crackled. "Come outside," my own voice. Calm, familiar, repeated again. "Come outside." I froze, staring at the speaker. The voice sounded like a recording of me, but slightly off. Slower, heavier. The urge to answer, to prove it wasn't real, gnawed at me. The intercom hissed, and then silence. I waited for a long time before I dared move. I could hear the sea lapping gently against the supports, as if waiting for something. My throat was dry, my hands numb. Finally, I switched the system off and sat in the dark until morning. Harris didn't come in that day. I found his ID clipped to the toolbox near the maintenance hatch. The hatch led down to the lower platform, the part that touched the water. No one was supposed to go down there alone. The steel ladder creaked under my weight as I descended, flashlight cutting through the mist. The air smelled of salt and rust. When I reached the bottom, the first thing I noticed was the waterline, higher than usual, lapping quietly against the pipes. The surface was unnaturally still. Then I saw a boot floating. Harris's boot. My stomach dropped. I scanned the area. No sign of struggle, no broken railing, just the boot, and next to it, something glinting faintly in the light. His flashlight. I leaned closer, careful not to look directly down, just enough to catch the edge of the beam. That's when something moved in the reflection. Not Harris, me. The reflection tilted its head the wrong way, then raised a hand, not mirroring mine, but beckoning. The water beneath it shimmered, and for a split second, I thought I saw shapes, pale human-like forms, floating just below. I staggered back, nearly losing my footing, and sprinted up the ladder without looking again. Back in the control room, the monitors were flickering. Every camera feed pointed toward the deck, and in each frame, faint outlines stood near the railing, dozens of them, motionless, facing inward. My reflection smiled from every dark screen, even the ones turned off. I yanked the main breaker, plunging everything into darkness. The humming started again, louder now, echoing through the hull. Then came the knock, soft, measured, from the door behind me. I didn't move. Another knock, slower this time, almost patient. I backed away until I hit the wall, my flashlight shaking in my grip. The knocking stopped. Then I heard a drip, slow, steady, from above. I looked up. Water was seeping through the ceiling tiles, forming tiny dark spots that spread across the floor. The air smelled briny. I realized it wasn't leaking from the pipes. It was coming from above, from the upper deck. My radio crackled. "Don't look at them," a voice whispered, faint, distant, like Harris's but warped. "If you see your reflection again, run." The transmission cut off. I hesitated, staring at the puddle near my feet. Ripples spread across it, not from the leak, but from something moving beneath the floor. I ran, past the control panels, down the narrow hall, through the living quarters. The humming followed, vibrating through the walls, through my ribs. When I reached my bunk, I locked the door and turned off every light. In the darkness, I could still see that smile burned into my mind. The ocean wasn't just reflecting light anymore. It was reflecting life, copying it, twisting it. Somewhere out there, something was learning to look like me. And I think next time the lights dim, it won't just watch from the water. It'll climb up to see how real the difference feels. Sleep doesn't come easy on the rig anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I hear that faint humming deep beneath the steel, like the ocean is whispering against the hull. I tried ignoring it at first, telling myself it was pressure shifts, maybe thermal expansion, but that lie only works until the first knock. It came around 3:17 a.m., slow, deliberate, echoing up through the floor. I froze in my bunk, the sound vibrating through the metal frame. I remembered Rule 4, never open the hatch when you hear knocking from below. But part of me wanted to check if someone was trapped down there. Harris was still missing, and the thought of him alive, banging for help, almost made me reach for the latch. Instead, I pressed my ear to the cold floor. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. The pattern wasn't random. It felt intentional, like someone trying to communicate. I whispered Harris's name into the dark. The knocking stopped instantly. Then came a faint scrape, metal against metal, sliding slowly under my feet. My breath caught as I realized the sound wasn't beneath the rig anymore. It was moving upward, climbing through the maintenance shafts that ran like veins through the structure. I backed away from the hatch, heart pounding, listening as the scrape passed beneath my cabin, traveling toward the central deck. By the time I reached the control room, the cameras were flickering again. The static had a pulse to it, like breathing. One feed showed the lower platform, the hatch door slightly ajar, seawater pooling around the edges. It shouldn't have been possible. I locked that hatch myself 2 nights ago. Grabbing a flashlight, I moved through the corridor, each step echoing in the hollow quiet. The rig felt heavier somehow, the air thick with moisture. When I reached the stairwell leading down, I noticed faint wet footprints leading upward, bare footprints. They stopped halfway, smeared into streaks like someone had dragged their feet the rest of the way. I wanted to run, but something compelled me forward. At the bottom of the stairs, the hatch stood open, the metal latch twisted as if pulled from the inside. The water lapping just beyond it was almost perfectly still, too still for open sea. I leaned close enough to see my reflection shimmering on the surface. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the reflection blinked. Even though I hadn't, I stumbled backward, slamming the hatch shut, twisting the manual wheel until it locked. That's when I heard it again. 3 knocks, from the other side, followed by a voice. "Help me." It was Harris's voice. Weak, distorted, muffled by the steel. I froze, hand still gripping the latch. "Harris," I whispered. "Is that you?" The voice came again, this time closer, clearer. "Please open the hatch." My pulse thundered in my ears. It sounded like him, the same tone, the same cadence, but there was something off, a kind of echo behind each word, like 2 voices speaking together, slightly out of sync. I stepped back slowly, shaking my head. "You're not him," I said. Silence. Then one final knock, softer this time, almost gentle, before it stopped entirely. When I returned to the upper deck, the lights were dimming again. The sea below glowed faintly, like something bioluminescent moving beneath the waves. I tried hailing base through the radio, but all I got was static, until a voice came through. Not the base operator. Mine. "Why didn't you open it?" it asked. I dropped the mic, staring at it as my voice repeated again. Slower, more broken. "Why didn't you open it?" The radio hissed, then went silent. I backed away, but the humming started again, this time rising in pitch, like pressure building. Hours passed. I didn't sleep. Every creak of metal felt like footsteps. Every vibration felt like something crawling through the rig's veins. Around 4 a.m., I heard it again, knocking. But this time, it wasn't below. It was coming from the walls. The sound moved along the corridors, circling, closing in. I pressed myself against the door, holding my breath, counting the seconds between each knock. The rhythm was steady, calm, almost human. Then suddenly, it stopped outside my cabin. Silence stretched for a full minute before I heard something new, the sound of water trickling down the doorframe. I looked toward the window. A thin stream of seawater was leaking in from a crack that hadn't been there before. I wiped it with my sleeve, but it only spread, tracing letters across the metal, 3 words written in dripping salt: "Open the hatch." My chest tightened. I turned away, refusing to read it again. The water hissed softly, evaporating into mist, leaving behind the faint scent of brine. Somewhere outside, I heard footsteps pacing the deck. Slow, wet, not rushing, just walking, waiting. By morning the footprints were gone, and the hatch below remained sealed. But the cameras showed new movement, shapes just under the surface, gathering near the base supports. I could see hands pressing up against the steel, pale and reaching. Some of them were missing fingers. One of them was wearing Harris's watch. I cut the feed. There was nothing I could do. The rules existed for a reason, and I'd come closer than anyone should to breaking this one. Still, sometimes, late at night, when the wind dies and the ocean is still, I can hear the knocking again. 3 short, 2 long. It's never random. It's waiting, patient, persistent. One day, I know I'll make a mistake. One night, I'll answer it, and whatever's down there will finally come up. The nights after the knocking incident felt longer than ever. Every shift dragged like time itself was stretching, and the light became my only anchor. I started keeping the deck lights on, even during dawn, terrified that a shadow might linger beneath the platform, waiting for darkness. The others used to complain about the constant glare, but now I was the only one left to see it. When the generator began flickering that week, I felt the first tremor of panic in my chest. The platform wasn't just rusting, it was dimming, like something below wanted the dark to return. I knew I had to remember Rule 5, never turn off the deck lights, no matter how bright the moon looks. But the moon that night was so full, so silver, it painted the ocean like glass. The power cut out at 1:42 a.m. The sudden silence felt like the rig had stopped breathing. I grabbed my flashlight and ran toward the maintenance panel, heart hammering in my throat. The emergency lights were dead too. Only the moonlight remained, flooding through the open railings and reflecting off the wet steel like liquid mercury. The whole platform looked unreal, like a photograph of itself. Then I saw something moving near the edge, a figure still watching. It wasn't Harris, it wasn't anyone human. The head tilted at a slow, unnatural angle, and even though it was more than 30 feet away, I swear it smiled. When the clouds swallowed the moon, I sprinted for the backup generator, hands shaking as I pulled the start cord again and again until the motor coughed to life. The deck lights flared weakly, struggling to stay on. When they finally did, the figure was gone. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I collapsed beside the machine. The hum of electricity felt like a heartbeat returning to the rig. But just as the relief settled in, a new sound crept through the static of the radio. Someone whispering numbers, not coordinates, just counting, slowly, from 1 to 11. I turned the dial, trying to kill the transmission, but the whisper kept returning, louder each time I passed channel 9. It stopped at 10, then silence. I stepped away, uneasy. My flashlight beam jittered across the bulkheads, revealing wet streaks along the walls, as though water had crawled upward. The streaks led toward the deck door. Against my better judgment, I followed. The handle was cold, slick. I hesitated before pushing it open, and the air outside hit me with that thick, salty humidity that always comes before a storm. Only there were no clouds in the sky, just the moon, unnaturally bright. The light from it made the waves shimmer like molten metal. Every reflection on the surface rippled with strange precision, as if mimicking a heartbeat. Then the lights flickered again. For an instant the rig plunged into darkness, and in that single heartbeat of blackness, I heard it breathing, close behind me. When the lights came back, the deck was empty. I stood frozen, gripping the railing, scanning every shadow, until I noticed the cable spools beside the hatch. They were wet, dripping, but there hadn't been any spray, no waves high enough to reach this level. Whatever was down there had climbed up. The next day, I inspected the cables. Every single one was coated in a thin layer of algae, the kind that only grows far below sunlight depth. It didn't make sense. I scrubbed it clean, but by nightfall, the green film returned, thicker than before. I doubled the power to the floodlights, burning through fuel reserves, but I didn't care. The rig needed to stay bright. I couldn't let the dark take hold again. Then just before midnight, the system alarm triggered. Power overload. The backup generator sputtered, struggling under the strain. I had to make a choice. Cut the lights for a few minutes to reset the grid, or risk the whole system collapsing. I stared at the switch. My fingers hovered over it. Then I heard the radio. Channel 9 crackled to life again, the whisper returning, slower this time. 10, 11. And then in a voice that matched my own, "Turn it off." The urge hit like static in my brain, a compulsion that wasn't mine. I backed away, pressing my palms over my ears, but the voice wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was vibrating inside my head. "Turn it off. Let us see." My vision pulsed with spots of light. I staggered toward the breaker room, half blind with dizziness. Every step echoed like footsteps following me. I reached the control box and slammed my hand against the reset lever. Sparks erupted, the lights flaring one last time before the generator roared back to life. The voice stopped. The silence that followed was thick, like the ocean itself was holding its breath. I stayed there for hours, watching the gauges, refusing to leave that spot until the sun started bleeding over the horizon. When dawn finally came, I realized I wasn't alone in the room. On the opposite wall, written in wet saltwater letters, was a message: when the lights die, we walk. The words were dripping down the metal, as if freshly painted, but the air was bone dry. I backed away slowly, the letters melting into streaks that ran toward the floor drain. Something below clanged once, like a heavy chain snapping tight. I didn't check what it was. I just ran. Now every night, I sit by the control panel with both generators running. I don't sleep anymore. The floodlights burn so bright that the whole rig looks like a floating ghost from miles away, but I can't risk letting them dim. Sometimes, when clouds hide the moon, I see faint shapes moving at the edge of the light, tall, thin silhouettes pacing the waterline. They never come closer, not while it's bright. But if the power ever fails again, if the moon ever shines too perfectly on the calm black water, I know they'll climb, and when they do, the dark won't just belong to the sea anymore. After the message on the wall faded, I started sleeping in shifts of minutes, not hours. Every sound on the rig became sharper, more personal, like the platform itself was breathing through its metal ribs. I knew I was losing it, but I couldn't leave. The helicopter wouldn't come for another week, and the company's network logs showed no other human presence within 200 miles. Every night I repeated the same mantra: stay in the light, don't look over the rail, and remember Rule 6, never answer the radio after midnight, no matter who calls. The first call came at 12:03 a.m. static, then a voice, soft, strained, wet with the sound of water. Deck control, do you read me? I froze. The line was dead 2 days ago. After the storm damaged the antenna, my hand hovered above the receiver. The voice came again, clearer now, the same phrasing the night shift operator used before he vanished last week. Deck control, do you copy? It sounded exactly like Harris, the same rhythm, the same low cough at the end of every sentence. For a moment instinct took over. I reached for the mic. My thumb brushed the transmit button, and then the generator hissed, lights dimming for half a second, like something had inhaled the power. I pulled my hand back. The voice changed. Don't ignore me. The pitch deepened, human words stretched wrong, vowels warped by distance and depth. I stared at the dials. The signal strength was spiking, as if the transmission was coming from directly below the rig. I stepped closer to the window. The ocean below was unnaturally still. No waves, no wind, just a perfect black mirror reflecting the floodlights. Then somewhere in the reflection, I saw it, another rig, upside down, beneath the water, lights flickering in the exact same pattern as ours. The voice on the radio whispered again, this time with static sharp as knives. Look over the side. I ran. My breath came out in bursts, my boots hammering the metal walkway, until I reached the control cabin and ripped the main power switch off the radio. Silence slammed through the air like a physical blow. I stood there shaking, staring at the ocean, knowing something was still listening. I could feel it in my teeth, that low hum that wasn't from the generator anymore. At dawn, I found footprints in the condensation on the inside of the window. Bare feet, long narrow toes, webbed at the ends. Each print led toward the radio console, stopping right beside the receiver. I scrubbed them off until my hands bled. The next night, I chained the radio cabinet shut. I thought I was safe then, but the sound returned, not through the speakers, through the pipes. Voices murmuring up through the drainage channels, calling names I didn't remember telling anyone. Then, tapping, rhythmic, patient, from the ventilation shafts above my bunk. On the fourth night, the call came again, despite the chain. The light above the radio flickered on by itself, the speaker grill glowing with a dull red pulse. I covered my ears. The voice this time was my own. Deck control, do you read me? Then laughter, thin and watery, like bubbles rising from something drowned. I grabbed the emergency wrench and smashed the entire console until it cracked apart, sparks spraying across the floor. The smell of burnt metal filled the air, but underneath it was something else, a smell like salt and rot, old fish and wet earth. I tried to convince myself it was just seawater corrosion, but when I stepped back, I saw something glinting among the wires, a tooth, long, pale, perfectly clean. By morning, I'd decided to cut the radio cable completely and toss the remains overboard. But when I went out on deck, every antenna was gone, just smooth metal stumps, like they'd never been welded there. And the sky was clear, but the horizon looked wrong, bent, like the sea itself was leaning toward the platform. That night, I barricaded myself in the control room. No radio, no noise, just the hum of electricity and my own heartbeat echoing inside the walls. Around 12:15, the intercom clicked on, even though the main system was offline. Then came a voice whispering through the static. "You broke it, now we can't warn you." The lights dimmed again. The shadows on the far wall began to move. Not flicker, move. Elongated shapes stretched upward, bending around corners where no light reached. I grabbed the flare gun, my only defense left, and aimed at nothing. The metal floor beneath my boots vibrated, with something rising, something heavy and slow, climbing up the rig's supports. When the deck groaned from the weight, I fired the flare through the nearest porthole. The red burst illuminated the ocean for half a second, enough to see dozens of pale faces staring up at me from beneath the surface. Eyes open, mouths moving silently, each one whispering a word I couldn't hear, but I could feel it scraping inside my skull. The flare died. The dark swallowed everything again. I spent the rest of the night sitting against the control door, with my knees to my chest, flare gun loaded, whispering to myself to stay awake. By dawn, the whispers stopped. The water was calm again, no sign of the figures, only a thin layer of frost on the metal. Frost, even though the temperature read 20 degrees higher than freezing. The pattern of the frost spelled something jagged across the glass. Now I keep the radio buried under steel plating, but sometimes the static still hums in the walls. Sometimes the numbers start counting again, 1 to 11, always stopping just before 12. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear my own voice in the distance, calling from below the rig, asking if anyone's there. It began with a sound that wasn't the sea, a low, rhythmic thud that pulsed beneath the platform like a heartbeat. I checked the gauges. No pressure changes, no movement in the machinery, but the deck was trembling under my boots. When I leaned out the window, I realized the water had risen unnaturally high. The platform stood 50 feet above sea level, yet waves now licked the edges of the main deck, as though the ocean had swollen overnight. That's when I remembered Rule 7. Never step outside when the waterline rises higher than the deck. At first I didn't believe it. The ocean doesn't just rise like that. Not in calm weather, not without a storm. But the horizon was gone, hidden beneath a rolling layer of mist that pulsed with faint blue light. Every few seconds, something large moved beneath it, distorting the surface like a massive shadow breathing in the dark. I could hear the water sloshing against the supports, deeper and slower than any tide I'd ever known. It sounded deliberate, almost sentient. Then came the knocking, not from the door, not from the hull, but from below. The sound echoed through the floor plates, heavy and wet, as though something was climbing up the columns. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it through the grated floor. What I saw beneath nearly made me drop the light. Fingers, dozens of them, pale and long, pressing through the gaps, reaching toward me. They withdrew just as quickly, vanishing back into the dark water. The platform creaked, metal stretching under strain, and I stumbled backward. I needed to see how bad it was. Against every instinct, I went to the hatch and peered through the porthole. The floodlights were still on, casting long beams across the deck, but the sea wasn't reflecting them anymore. It was absorbing them. The light just sank into the water, swallowed whole. I realized then the ocean wasn't water at all. It was thicker, darker, moving like a living skin. I forced myself away from the door and back to the control panel. The monitors flickered with static, the same distortion that had infected the radio. For a moment an image appeared, a camera feed from the underside of the rig. The lights down there showed something impossible, a face, massive and ancient, pressed against the metal framework. Its eyes were open, unblinking, studying the platform like a predator watching trapped prey. The feed cut out. I felt the tilt of the rig before I saw it, a subtle shift underfoot, as though the whole structure were being lifted. Bolts groaned, cables strained. I dropped to my knees, clutching the railing. The sound of metal tearing filled the air as the platform tilted 2 degrees starboard, just enough for one corner of the deck to dip into the rising water. The moment the steel touched the surface, the lights flickered violently. The mist outside glowed brighter. Then came the first scream, not from any person. There was no one left, but from the metal itself. It howled through every beam and pipe, vibrating the air with a sound like a dying animal. The sea was climbing the rig, wrapping it in dark waves that pulsed like veins. I staggered to the emergency ladder, thinking maybe the top deck would be safer. The higher I climbed, the worse the air became. It stank of brine and rot, and the mist seemed to thicken into something you could almost touch. The floodlights overhead sputtered one by one, until only a faint emergency bulb glowed red across the upper platform. That's when I saw the waterline again, now level with the top rail. The entire ocean had risen nearly 50 feet in minutes. Then I saw movement below, dozens of silhouettes floating just beneath the surface, swaying like seaweed. They weren't bodies, not exactly. Their shapes were human, but too long, too flexible. Their limbs moved in slow, unnatural rhythms, bending where bones shouldn't. I realized they were watching me. Their heads tilted in perfect unison whenever I moved. A gust of wind carried a voice up from the mist. Not words, just my name, whispered like a sigh dragged across water. I stumbled back, nearly slipping on the wet metal. The voice came again, closer this time. It was the same voice I'd heard on the radio. My own. Come down. I turned toward the control cabin. The windows were fogged from the inside. Shapes pressed against the glass hands, faces, grinning mouths. I knew they couldn't be real, but the condensation dripped in trails that spelled out letters. Open the door. The platform tilted again. One of the storage containers slid across the deck, hitting the rail and plunging into the sea. I watched it sink instantly, like it had been dragged down. Whatever was beneath us wanted in. The waterline rose higher still, brushing the edge of the window. I ran back to the control console. The generator's warning lights flashed red. Power output was dropping fast. The ocean wasn't just rising. It was draining the energy, feeding on it. I tried to override the failsafe, but the main terminal flickered, showing only one line of text before shutting off completely. Do not step outside. I fell to my knees, laughing and crying at once. Even the machine knew the rule. Rule 7 wasn't just a precaution, it was a warning. The sea didn't drown you here, it took you. The next few hours blurred together. I remember the cold creeping through the walls, the lights dimming one by one, and the sound of something scraping along the hull. At one point, I swear I saw a hand slide across the window, leaving streaks of blood-red algae. It lingered there, palm flat, as if inviting me to touch it back. I almost did. Then the alarm went off. Water breach in Section 3. I grabbed the nearest wrench and ran, praying it was a false reading. When I opened the bulkhead, I saw a hole the size of a dinner plate punched through solid steel. Water was gushing in, not like a leak, but like something forcing its way through, and inside that water, something moved. I slammed the door shut and sealed it. The rig groaned again, metal bending as the pressure built. I backed away until I hit the wall. For the next 6 hours, I listened to the platform breathe. The waterline finally stopped rising at dawn. By morning, the ocean looked calm again, perfectly flat, like nothing had ever happened. But the mist never left. And when I look over the rail now, sometimes I see faces staring back, not drowned, not dead, just waiting. And I think I finally understand what the waterline means. It isn't rising, we're sinking. After the waterline sank, or maybe after we did, the engine room became my heartbeat. The constant low vibration of the turbines was the only sound that still felt human, the only reminder that the platform was alive, and not just another corpse floating in the dark. That's why when the hum stopped, the silence hit like a gunshot. It was the kind of silence that swallows breath, that presses on your skull until you start to hear your own pulse. I knew right away what it meant. Rule 8. Never sleep while the engines are silent. I checked the monitors, dead. The main breaker hadn't tripped, yet all the readings were blank. Power failure in every sector. The emergency generator wasn't responding either. I grabbed my flashlight and ran down the maintenance corridor. Every step echoed too loud, like the walls were listening. When I reached the engine room door, condensation rolled off the handle, freezing my skin. It was warm an hour ago, but now the air smelled like old salt and rusted blood. The room beyond was dark, except for the faint glow of control lights that flickered like dying stars. The turbines were motionless, great metallic beasts silenced mid-breath. I climbed over a fallen pipe, shining my light into the coolant pit. The water there was rippling gently, though nothing had moved. Then beneath the surface, something blinked. 2 yellow circles, then 2 more. Eyes, dozens of them, staring back up from below the grates. I staggered back, tripping on a cable. The eyes vanished as if they'd never been there. My light trembled against the walls. I could hear water trickling inside the pipes, a slow gurgling noise that rose and fell in rhythm, like breathing. I reached for the manual override lever, but my hand froze when the intercom crackled to life. Still awake, the voice was calm, male, unfamiliar. The intercom shouldn't have worked. It was tied to the dead power grid. "Who is this?" I asked, but the voice ignored me. "You can rest now," it said. "The engines will start themselves when you're asleep." I dropped the flashlight. The voice came from behind me this time, whispering through the engine's exhaust vents. "Sleep. They're waiting." The air turned heavy, almost liquid. I felt it pressing against my skin, seeping into my lungs. My eyelids grew heavier by the second. I forced myself to slap my face. To stay conscious, I stumbled back into the corridor, gasping for air that didn't smell like the sea. Back in the control cabin, I overturned a chair and pressed myself against the far wall. Every shadow looked alive. I found caffeine tablets in the emergency drawer and swallowed 3 dry, choking on the bitterness. My reflection in the porthole glass stared back at me, but a few seconds late, as though whatever was mimicking me had forgotten the rhythm. Hours passed. The silence kept deepening. It wasn't absence of sound anymore. It was something deeper, like the platform existed in a vacuum. No wind, no waves, no groaning of steel. My ears began ringing from the pressure of nothingness. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the engine corridor. I gripped the flare gun tight and waited. The figure that stepped out wasn't human. It looked like me, same uniform, same face, but its movements were wrong. Too smooth, too slow. It stopped 3 feet away, and for a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then it smiled. "You look tired," it said, my voice coming out of its mouth. "Sleep. I'll keep the engines running." I pulled the trigger. The flare burst between us, filling the corridor with red light. When the smoke cleared, the thing was gone. Only a scorch mark remained on the wall, shaped vaguely like a handprint. The engines roared back, to life on their own, 10 minutes later, I didn't touch a thing. The hum filled the platform again, steady and rhythmic, and the relief was almost worse than the fear. I knew the sound wasn't mechanical anymore. It was alive. It was breathing through the turbines. That night, I stayed in the control room too afraid to blink. Every time the engines pulsed, I could feel it in my bones, something deep below the surface, turning in sync. When I looked out at the water, I saw faint lights circling beneath the rig, moving in perfect rhythm with the turbine's thrum, like a heartbeat under the sea. At some point, exhaustion took me. Despite the fear, I jolted awake to silence. Total suffocating silence. My heart dropped. I didn't remember falling asleep. The air felt colder, heavier, and when I turned toward the window, there was a face pressed against the glass. Mine again, eyes open wide, mouthing one word over and over. Wake. I grabbed the flare gun again and stumbled out of the cabin. The engines were off. The air tasted like iron and rot. I heard movement below, water sloshing, chains dragging. I rushed to the engine room door, but the hallway was gone. The space stretched on infinitely, steel walls rippling like reflections on water. The hum returned, faint and distorted, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then whispering, a chorus of voices humming with the engine's pulse. I caught phrases between the noise. Stay awake, don't breathe, we're still here. The air shimmered with heat, or maybe static. I pressed my palms to my ears and ran, but every door led back to the same corridor, looping endlessly. The hum grew louder, until it wasn't sound anymore, but vibration inside my skull. When I finally reached the control cabin again, dawn had arrived. The engines were running, perfectly normal. The gauges read stable. Everything looked fine, but there were fingernail scratches all over the inside of the cabin door, spelling one line in jagged letters: you slept. Now I keep the engines running day and night. I feed them extra fuel, even when there's no reason. The noise keeps me safe, or maybe it just keeps them fed. I don't really sleep anymore. I just close my eyes for seconds at a time, listening for the silence. That means it's over. Sometimes I wonder if the hum I hear now isn't the engines at all. Maybe it's something else pretending to be alive, waiting for me to rest again. The first time I heard the alarm, it was faint, like a distant siren caught beneath the waves. The second time, it came through the entire rig, shaking every metal beam with a pulse that rattled my teeth. But it was the third one, the deep guttural tone, echoing up from the lowest decks, that froze me in place. I didn't need the manual to remind me. Rule 9. Never use the elevator after the third alarm sounds. The elevator had always been my least favorite part of the rig. It was a narrow steel box that dropped more than 100 feet through the platform skeleton, connecting the upper control decks to the maintenance levels below sea surface. Its walls always felt damp, humming slightly, like it was part of something alive. Still, it was the fastest way to reach the lower engine bay. And when the gauges on my console started spiking red, I had no choice but to go down. I told myself the third alarm didn't really count. Maybe it was a glitch from the storm damage. Maybe the system was misreading the generator's feedback. The rationalizations sounded thin, even in my head, but the noise coming from below, like 1,000 gears grinding at once, left me no room for choice. I swiped my keycard and stepped inside the elevator. The doors shut with a metallic sigh that sounded too much like relief. The descent started normal, jerky, loud, but functional. Then halfway down, the lights flickered and the hum of machinery outside dimmed. The cabin shuddered once, twice, and then everything went silent. My stomach dropped. The floor indicator froze at level 3. The lights cut out. For a few seconds, I could hear nothing but my own breathing. Then something brushed the outer wall, a slow dragging scrape that moved from one side of the elevator to the other. It paused directly behind me. The metal began to bulge inward, as if something was pressing from the outside, testing the surface. I held my breath. The bulge shifted higher, then lower, like a hand searching for a handle. When the emergency light snapped on, I nearly screamed. The red glow revealed streaks along the interior walls, wet, slimy, running in crooked lines. Something had written symbols with what looked like rust, or maybe blood. Circles crossed with vertical lines, repeating over and over. I wiped one with my sleeve, and it smeared into a fingerprint pattern that wasn't human. Then the elevator started moving again, but not down. Up, the motor groaned, fighting something heavy. The indicator lights blinked erratically. 2, 4, 1, 3, nonsense readings. I jammed the stop button. Nothing happened. The car was still rising. As it climbed, I heard the intercom crackle. Static hissed, and then a voice emerged. Distant but familiar. "Deck control, we're coming up." It was Harris again, the operator who'd vanished weeks ago. His tone was calm, casual, like he'd never left. "Don't go anywhere," he said. "The elevator's almost there." I pounded the control panel. "Who are you?" I shouted. "Where's Harris?" The voice chuckled softly. "You're below us now." I looked up at the ceiling vent. Something was moving behind the grill, shadows twisting, hands pressed against the mesh. I hit the emergency latch and forced the doors open. The elevator hadn't reached any floor, but I didn't care. I climbed out into a narrow maintenance shaft and dropped hard onto the grating. The elevator doors slid shut behind me, sealing the red glow inside like a heartbeat. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then the elevator started shaking violently. I backed away, gripping the railing. The cable above groaned, stretching. A wet, cracking sound came from inside, like bones breaking underwater. The floor of the car bulged outward, then split open from the middle. Something black and glistening spilled out, twisting, dragging itself along the shaft walls. I ran. The alarm blared again, this time deafening. My flashlight beam trembled as I sprinted through the lower corridor. The pipes above were sweating, dripping thick, dark fluid that smelled of oil and rot. Every few steps, I caught glimpses of the elevator moving in parallel through narrow viewports, sometimes above me, sometimes beside me, sometimes ahead. It wasn't descending anymore. It was following. By the time I reached the secondary access hatch, my hands were shaking too badly to grip the wheel. Behind me, metal screamed as the elevator smashed through its shaft. I turned the valve and dove through the opening, just as the walls caved in. The sound of tearing metal faded behind me, replaced by something worse, a voice whispering through the vents. "You should have stayed inside." I crawled through the maintenance tunnel for what felt like hours. The deeper I went, the more the air thickened, until each breath felt like swallowing seawater. The metal beneath me grew slick, soft, like living tissue. I didn't dare shine my light down. I just kept crawling until the tunnel opened into a chamber I didn't recognize. It looked like an old observation deck, one of the sealed research pods beneath the platform, long since decommissioned. The walls were lined with glass panels, looking out into the ocean. Outside, in the dark, shapes moved, not fish, not human. Massive silhouettes gliding past, their surfaces shimmering with faint metallic light. One of them turned, and for a moment, I thought it was looking directly at me. Then I realized it was the elevator car, crushed, twisted, sinking slowly into the black. The lights inside were still flickering, and for a split second, I saw figures standing within, tall, thin, motionless. Their faces were pressed against the glass, watching me. The chamber lights died, total blackness. Only the faint glow from outside remained, shifting like pale lightning. I pressed my hand against the glass, and it was cold, colder than ice. Something pressed back from the other side. When I woke up, I was on the upper deck, lying beside the main console. The elevator indicator blinked. Idle. The alarms were silent. Everything looked normal. But when I checked the system logs, the last recorded movement of the elevator was at 3:11 a.m. hours after I'd climbed out, and beneath the data entry, someone had typed a single line into the console. We reached you. Now when I hear the first alarm, I don't move. When I hear the second, I pray. And when I hear the third, I close my eyes and cover my ears, because I know what's waiting inside that elevator, and it's still trying to come back up. They told me it was harmless. A simple maintenance check. One last watch before lights out. But that was before I learned Rule 10. Never open the observation shutters after midnight. I didn't believe it back then. I thought it was another piece of rig superstition, a half-joke whispered between shifts to keep the rookies on edge. Now I know better. Our station was positioned 200 miles off the coast, balanced above a trench so deep our sonar couldn't even map its floor. They called it Section 9, one of the most isolated rigs in operation. During daylight, the ocean stretched endlessly, blue and calm. But at night, the water turned to black glass, and the world outside our floodlights felt like a different planet. That's when the voices began. The first time I heard them, I was in the observation bay alone, logging turbulence data. The station creaked with the low moan of pressure settling, metal contracting. Normal sounds, I told myself. Then faintly from the speakers came a voice, distorted, echoing through the system. "Help me." I froze. It was followed by static, then silence. The comms were dead at that depth. No one could transmit through 2 miles of seawater. I shut off the radio and stared through the shutters, their metal slats drawn tight across the glass. There was nothing beyond but the hum of the ocean. Still, I could feel it. Something was out there, waiting. By midnight, curiosity gnawed through my nerves. I told myself I'd just take a peek, open the shutters for a second, confirm there was nothing wrong, and close them again. But when I slid the lever down, the motor stuttered, hesitated, then obeyed with a hiss. The shutters opened. The sea beyond was pitch black, featureless, except for the faint shimmer of the floodlights below. I leaned closer to the glass, then movement. Something enormous glided past, slower than a whale, smooth and silent. The floodlights flickered, just once. My reflection in the glass seemed to linger half a second too long after I moved away. I reported the flicker the next morning. The chief engineer didn't even look up from his clipboard. "You opened the shutters after midnight, didn't you?" he asked. I didn't answer. He sighed and marked something down on his log. "Happens every few months. You'll start seeing reflections that don't line up. Don't worry, they stop after a few days." He was wrong. The next night, I saw the reflection again, but it wasn't me. It stood in the same place, the same uniform, the same tired eyes. But when I moved, it didn't. It just watched. The glass seemed thicker, like it was holding a second version of the room behind it. When I blinked, it was gone. By the fourth night, the others noticed things too. One of the cooks swore someone was standing outside the galley window, tapping on the glass from the wrong side of the station. A diver claimed to see a light pulsing beneath the platform that matched the station's power signal exactly. We laughed it off during breakfast, but nobody laughed that evening when the power cut out for 22 seconds. And in that darkness, we all heard the tapping. When the backup generator came on, one of the portholes was cracked from the inside. We sealed the observation bay and marked it off limits. The rules were reinstated over the intercom. No visual access to the outer sea between 00:00 and 0600 hours. Rule 10. Never open the observation shutters after midnight. But it didn't matter. The next shift, I found the shutters open again. Not halfway, all the way. The control lever was jammed down, bent by force. The viewing glass was fogged from the inside, as if something had been breathing against it. When I wiped the surface clear, the fog reformed in perfect handprints, one on each pane, each the size of my own. I should have left. I should have sealed the room and flooded it if I had to. But I couldn't stop watching, because now, every time I looked through that glass, I saw more of the ocean lit by faint glimmers, lights forming patterns, spirals, like bioluminescent veins, stretching into the dark. And deep within those lights were shapes, not swimming, walking. I don't remember unlocking the bay door. I don't remember stepping closer. But the next thing I knew, My palms were pressed against the glass, my breath fogging it again. The figures stopped moving. One of them turned its head. It looked human. It raised its hand slowly, mirroring mine. Then another hand rose beside it. Then another. Within seconds, dozens of pale faces emerged from the dark, all pressing against the opposite side of the glass, each one wearing my expression. I stumbled back, my knees shaking. The glass pulsed once, like a heartbeat. The floodlights below flickered out completely, and in that brief pitch-black silence, I heard whispering from the other side, dozens of voices overlapping, too faint to distinguish. The last word before the lights came back was my name. When I ran to the control room, the logs showed no power fluctuations, no system alerts, nothing unusual. But the internal cameras in the observation bay had frozen for exactly 17 seconds. Right when the lights went out, the last recorded frame showed me standing by the window. But in the reflection, there were 3 of me. That night, I slept in the maintenance hall with the door bolted. I dreamed of the shutters, of something on the other side, tracing symbols into the glass. When I woke, those same symbols were scratched into the inside of my bunk window. It's been 6 nights since then. The voices are louder now. Sometimes I can hear them, even when the shutters are sealed, whispering through the vents, repeating phrases I don't understand. Last night, they spoke in perfect unison. Open them again. I checked the control logs this morning. The shutters are sealed, but the system shows manual override at 2:14 a.m. Someone, or something, opened them for exactly 12 seconds. The cameras went black. When the feed returned, the observation bay was empty. The crew's gone. Every bunk, every room, every deck. I'm the only one left. The doors are locked from the inside, but the station keeps creaking like someone's walking the corridors. I'm not opening the shutters tonight, no matter what I hear, no matter how much they call my name. But the whispering won't stop. And now, through the slats of the metal shutters, I can see light. Not the floodlights, something moving past them, flickering, waiting. If you're reading this and you ever find the station, remember this: never go near the observation bay after midnight. And if you hear tapping from the glass, don't tap back. By the time the emergency sirens failed, the station had already gone quiet. The generator's hum, once constant and comforting, had become uneven, stuttering like it was gasping for air. I knew the sound too well by now. It meant the ocean was shifting again, that something was moving beneath us. And that was when I remembered Rule 11. Never answer if someone outside calls your name. At first, it didn't seem like much of a rule. During training, they said it was superstition, a leftover story from the early crews who'd gone stir-crazy listening to the sea. You'll start hearing things, the chief had said with a laugh. The ocean plays tricks on you down here. Don't let it get to your head. I laughed too then, but the sound of my laughter feels like someone else's now. Someone who didn't yet know what was waiting beyond the hull. After the crew vanished, I stayed in the control bay. Every door sealed, every light burning at full power. My food supply would last a few weeks if I rationed, my oxygen longer. But time doesn't work right down here. Every hour stretches into days when you're waiting for a sound, waiting to hear your own name. It started that night. Around 3 a.m. I was reviewing the camera logs, trying to piece together the final moments before the others disappeared. Every feed looked normal, until one flickered. Frame by frame, I saw myself asleep in the maintenance corridor. Then another figure appeared beside me. Same uniform, same posture, but its head was tilted too far, its mouth slightly open, like it was whispering into my ear. When I paused the feed, the timestamp read 3 hours 11 minutes and 8 seconds, and the speakers behind me crackled. Daniel, my name. The voice was faint, stretched thin by static, but it was mine, my own voice. I froze. Every instinct screamed to reply, to demand who was there, but the rule echoed in my head like a warning bell. Never answer if someone outside calls your name. So I didn't. I muted the comms and turned every speaker off. But the whisper came again, clearer this time, from outside the observation bay. "Daniel, help me." I backed away from the glass. The shutters were sealed, but I could see movement behind them, a faint shadow, pacing just beyond the metal slats. Its outline was wrong, too long in the arms, too narrow in the shoulders. It stopped suddenly, facing me. I could feel it, even through the steel, watching, waiting for me to respond. I whispered to myself, over and over, "Don't answer, don't answer." The sound faded after a while, but I didn't sleep again. When morning came, if you can call it morning down here, I checked the logs. The airlock sensor had registered external pressure changes between 310 and 314, as if something massive had brushed against the station or climbed onto it. The next night, the voice returned. This time it didn't use the speakers. It came from the corridor itself. "Daniel." The syllables stretched, distorted by the metal walls, echoing like they were coming through water. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't stop. I could hear it from inside my head now, like memory and sound had merged. Then the emergency lights flickered red. Every sensor on the lower deck lit up with movement detection. I switched to the live feed, but the cameras showed nothing except the slow sway of cables and shadows that didn't belong to anything visible. I backed toward the door, clutching the manual override lever, and then through the static on one of the screens, I saw myself again. Not a reflection, me, standing in the observation bay, hand pressed against the shutter lever, face turned toward the camera. I hadn't left the control room. The lights died completely. The dark in that moment wasn't absence. It was alive. I could feel it breathe. I stumbled through the corridor toward the generator, hands shaking so badly I dropped my flashlight twice. The station groaned, a deep metallic sigh, and the faint vibration through the floor told me something was moving beneath the platform. Something large. When the lights finally came back, the airlock hatch indicator was flashing open. That should have been impossible. Inside the hatch chamber, water dripped steadily from the ceiling, pooling near the drain. The outer door was sealed tight, but condensation lined the inner walls, and faintly through the reinforced glass, I saw the outline of a person standing on the other side. The suit looked like one of our standard maintenance gear, faceplate fogged. Then I saw the lips move. "Daniel, it's okay. It's me." The voice wasn't through the speaker this time. It was direct, as if the metal itself carried it. My breath caught. It sounded exactly like my supervisor, the same man who disappeared 3 days earlier. "Open the door," it said. "You can't stay alone down here. You'll die if you don't let me in." The manual override lever was within reach. My hand hovered over it, trembling. For a moment I wanted to believe him, to believe any of it. But the rule that one final Rule 11 burned into my skull: never answer, never respond, never acknowledge. So I backed away, one step at a time. The voice changed then, twisting mid-sentence into something lower, wet, layered with multiple tones, like voices speaking in unison. "Answer me." The figure pressed its hands against the glass, and the room temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. Cracks spidered across the viewing port. Behind them, that same bioluminescent glow flared, the same pattern I'd seen through the shutters. It wasn't my supervisor. It wasn't human. I hit the emergency seal. The door hissed shut, locking the airlock behind 12 inches of steel. But I could still hear it. "Daniel, please." The voice followed me through the corridors, whispering from the vents, the drain pipes, even the power conduits. Sometimes it used my mother's voice, sometimes my own. "I haven't slept in 2 days. Now, the pressure sensors keep triggering again. Movement, just outside the hull. The external cameras show nothing but darkness. Still, I know it's there. It's been calling all night, growing louder each hour. And now it's changed tactics. It's stopped using the speakers. It's calling from inside the room. I can hear it just beyond the door, its footsteps heavy but slow, as if it's mimicking how I walk. It's whispering again. Daniel, it's cold outside. Let me in. I'm not answering. I'm not answering. No matter how close it gets, the generator is dying again. The lights are flickering. Each time they come back, the door handle is turned a little more. I think it's learning. If anyone finds this log, don't try to find me. Don't come here. Don't listen if the ocean speaks your name. Because once it does, you're already answering. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more.